Hello everyone and welcome to our video guide as a part of the project Steps Through Moscow. Today's special is dedicated to incredible and cozy streets, Arbat. So let's start our excursion. The Arbat is a true symbol of old Moscow and has recently celebrated its 500th anniversary. Its name is first mentioned in the city chronicles of 1493. In that year, the whole city was engulfed in a terrible fire, sparked by a candle in the church of Saint Nicholas in Pesky, which is situated on the Arbat. This disaster led to the well-known saying, "A penny candle raised Moscow to the ground."
It is far from certain where the famous name Arbat comes from. It might be from the Slavonic root Gorbats, which at the time meant hilly ground. The word is sometimes linked with the Arabic word Arbat, meaning suburb, for in the 15th century the Kremlin itself was regarded as the city proper. In those days, the Arbat was a place where caravans with goods from the east would stand, and an Arabic word could well have been assimilated into the local tongue.
Initially, there were many slobodas in the Arbat. The whole sloboda means a settlement exempted from certain obligations to the state. However, from the second half of 18th century, the Arbat became the most aristocratic quarter of their city, just like Prechistynka. It was often described as the Saint Germain of Moscow, and the Moscowite intelligentsia settled in this area. The Arbat and Prechistynka have much in common in their history and character. There have never been any factories here, nor any workers' huts, and there were no taverns or bazaars. Moscowites used to say, "For money, go to the Moskva-Resha, for a career, go to St. Petersburg, but for knowledge and memories, go to the Arbat." The area between the Arbat and Prechistynka takes us back to the unique world of quiet lanes where each house are still steeped in the atmosphere of old Moscow.
In 1986, the Arbat was repaved as the first pedestrian street in Moscow. It begins at number 2 with the old Prague restaurant, which owes its existence to the keen eyes and strong arm of a Marian called Tararukin. In the 1870s, the Prague was opened on the ground floor as an expensive eating house. Its customers were mainly cabmen working on this neighborhood, and it is no surprise to find that they nicknamed it the Braga, which means home-brewed beer. In 1896, Tararukin won the whole building as a wager on his billiards with his left hand. The industrial player decided to turn the Prague into a first-class restaurant, exploiting its advantageous position on the Arbat. He thought that he could earn large profits, and he spared no expense on the renovation, which was carried out by Kekushev and Eriksson, the best Moscow architects in the Art Nouveau style.
The new restaurant was noteworthy for its refined cuisine, which combines the traditions of Moscow's best specialist chefs, the Frenchman Oliver, who had worked on the Hermitage restaurant, and the renowned Testov from Охотный Ряд. Tararukin himself even surpassed Testov's skills with his celebrated open-topped sterlet pasties, for he cooked them with equal portions of sterlet and sturgeon. All the restaurant's crockery was decorated with the golden inscription, "A warm welcome from Tararukin." Nor did Tararukin forget how the restaurant had come into his possession. It had the best billiard tables in Moscow. In no time, the restaurant acquired the reputation as one of the best restaurants in Moscow, and official banquets were often held here.
After the revolution, the restaurant was requisitioned to become property of a state, and the low-price Marcelprom canteen was set up there in its place. In the 36, the place was transformed into a special canteen for Stalin's bodyguards, who supervised the area around the Arbat. This was because Stalin's motorcade would normally drive along the Arbat as the shortest route to his dacha at Kuntsevo. In 1954, the building was renovated and reopened as the Prague restaurant, while on the ground floor there was a shop section which sold pre-cooked foods such as holdeva and special dishes, all prepared by restaurant or chefs according to original exact recipes.
We can now turn right from the Arbat into the quiet Serebrny lane, which leads onto the new Arbat. In the olden days, this lane was populated by craftsmen employed at their mint, where silver coins were made. At one time, it was known as Manukov Lane, after a judge from St. Petersburg who lived in it. In 1728, he made a present of his estate to his daughter on her marriage to Vasily Suvorov, a lieutenant in the Preobrazhensky Regiment. A year later, the young couple was blessed with a son, who, by his life and deeds, made his surname known throughout the world. He was Alexander Suvorov, the illustrious military commander. The mansion, which faced onto the Arbat, did not survive the perils of our time. In 1941, it was destroyed by a German bomb.
Opposite Serebrny Lane, Starokonyushny Lane leads down from the Arbat. It is so called after the Starokonyushnya Sloboda of the Tsar Scott. At the very beginning of this lane, there is a modest wooden cottage with intricate fresco decorations. This small house, designed by the architects and built in 1817 for Porokhovchikov, a prominent businessman, was awarded a special prize of the World Exhibition in Paris as representing the Russian style. Towards the end of the last century, it was home for the family of Sergei Trubetskoy, the famous philosopher and professor in the University of Moscow. He loved music and quite often invited his friends for musical evenings. The composer Alexander Scriabin, still in his youth, used to play new compositions here.
On the left side of the Arbat, we can turn into Kaloshin Lane, which bears the name of one of the former residents. In Kaloshin Lane, at its junction with Sivtsev Razhik, there is a clumsy administrative building, adults with a tower. Last century, this was the site of a house owned by Count Fyodor Tolstoy, who was nicknamed the American. Krivo-Arbatsky Lane runs parallel to Kaloshin, and from its right side can be seen the wall of Viktor Tsoi, which was put up on the Arbat in 1990 as a memorial to this famous rock star. Many inscriptions to Tsoi's memory from his numerous funds are still in evidence here. Number 37 is the junction of Krivo-Arbatsky Lane, and the Arbat is the oldest building on the Arbat, and it dates from the end of 18th century. In the 1820s, it was owned by Count Bobrinsky, the grandson of Catherine the Great and Count Grigory Orlov. He was under surveillance by the secret police for failing to disclose information about the Decembrist secret society.
Большой Nikolai-Peskovsky Lane, it's 7 times Vakhtangov Street, is named after the church of St. Nicholas in Pesky, which once stood on the site now by Block 1. Between 1912 and 1915, the composer Alexander Scriabin lived at number 11 and wrote his divine poem and prose here. He died young at only 33 of a blood infection. He was buried in the neighboring church of St. Nicholas in Peske.
At the end of Большой Nikolo-Piskovsky Lane, a place known as Dog Square was located up to 1960s. Nowadays, the area is the site of the ugly boxes on the new Arbat main roads. It was one of the most precious and private little places in Moscow. In 16th and 17th centuries, there was a courtyard here where hounds were kept for the Tsar's favorite pastime, hunting. This was what gave the place its unusual name. The square was adorned with a little fountain on the form of a marble pyramid with dogs' heads arranged around it. It was erected in 1910 by a grandson of the philosopher Khomyakov at his own expense. Khomyakov had lived in this area in the 1840s. In February 1895, in Khomyakov's house, their Gnesin sisters founded the first moderately priced private music school, which today is known as Gnesin's Music School. After the school moved to Pavarska Street, the Khomyakov house was used for a museum of the nobility's way of life.
In 1962, in this old area of the city, they started laying out a broad highway to be known as Prospect Kalinin. Its modern name is Novy Arbat. A year later, there was nor a trace of Dog Square, for the government had argued the builders to complete their work in time for the anniversary of the revolution. And on the 7th of November, the first columns marched along the newly laid grid. Returning to the Arbat, number 43 was not many years the residence of the celebrated bard Vlad Kudjava, who can properly be described as the singer of the Arbat.
Number 53 was built in the mid-18th century, and in February 1831, Pushkin took a flat on the first floor with his young wife. This was the first and only Moscow apartment of the poet to be preserved. But by the spring, Pushkin was already in financial difficulties. Because of his excessive spending, he even had to pawn his wife's diamonds, and the whole of Moscow high society behaved towards Pushkin with ill will, circulating offensive rumors about him. All this forced Pushkin to leave the city and return to St. Petersburg in May of that year. After that, the house often changed hands. From 1884 to 1885, it was home to Tchaikovsky, and from 1920 to 1921, it housed the district's amateur theater of the Red Army, which worked on the avant-garde style. It was in this theater that the young heiress Gagarin made his first appearances.
Later, the house was turned into communal flats, and Pushkin's flat was totally forgotten. It was only in 1930, in the handbook Pushkin in Moscow, that there appeared information about this house on the Arbat. In February 1937, a memorial tablet was affixed to the wall, and on the 18th of February in 1986, after the reconstruction of the Arbat, Pushkin's flat was opened as a museum.
We can go from the Arbat into Plotnikov Lane. Plotnik means carpenter, and the place took its name from the fact that carpenters used to live here in the 18th century. At the corner where Plotnikov Lane meets Большой Mogiletsevsky Lane, the visitor's attention is attracted by number 4, corrected in 1907, for Broider, a doctor of commerce. On the first floor, the structure is decorated with a sculptured frieze. with images of Pushkin, Gogol and Lev Tolstoy, surrounded by mythological characters.
Денежный lane leads of the Arbat and takes its name from the fact that in the 17th century coiners lived here. The most attractive feature of this lane is the splendid mansion in model style number 5, which was reconstructed in 1897 by the architect Бойцов for a wealthy textile industrialist Berg. Up to the time, it was the residence of Zagoskin, a writer and director of Moscow theaters. He had magnificent library, which even made an impression of Gogol.
To the right runs Pasapiskovsky Lane, named after the church of the Savior in Pesky. This white stone church of the 17th century, with its steeple bell tower, is depicted in the well-known painting Moscow Courtyard by Polenov. Featured along this lane and number 10, there is a mansion in the neo-Empire style. It was built in 1914 by the architects Adamovich and Mayat for the millionaire financial Ftorov. Ftorov's mysterious death in his study gave rise to various rumors. It was suggested that he had been murdered by the Red Guard, or that his own son had done away with him in order to get his hands on his father's money more quickly. Whatever the truth was, the mansion had a bad reputation and appeared in the pages of the Master and Margarita as the house in which Satan's ball was held. After the revolution, the mansion was expropriated and used as an office for the People's Commissariat of Foreign Affairs. Today, it is the American ambassador official residence.
At the very end of the Arbat stands Smolensky Gastronom, one of Moscow's biggest grocery stores. For a long time after the revolution, it was known as Torexy, and the abbreviation of Торговля с иностранцами, trade with foreigners. Foreigners paid here in hard currency, while Soviet citizens could exchange their valuables for coupons in order to buy good quality products. Not far from the Arbat and Glavzovsky Lane, at the junction with Smolensky Boulevard, there is a magnificent mansion number 32. In the late 18th century, General Glazov lived here, and his name is repatriated in the name of a street. At the end of the last century, the mansion was bought by Mikhail Morozov, a renowned patron of the arts and founder of the Morozov picture collection. So, we came to the Smolensk metro station. I think it's time to finish our tour. We hope that you had a good time and learned something new about our dear capital, as well as discovered new places for yourself. Check out other releases of our projects. Bye!